Thank you. Mr. President, I just wanted to reiterate what I think is the key point in this entire debate. And that point is whether or not we develop a budget that works for the vast majority of our families, working families, middle-class families, who in many instances are working longer hours for lower wages, whether it works for our children at a time when we're experiencing the highest rate of childhood poverty of any major country, whether it works for our elderly citizens who often have to make the choice about whether or not they heat their homes by the medicine that they need, by the food they need. Millions of people in that position. Do we have a budget that works for them, or do we have a budget that works for the top 1%, people who are doing phenomenally well, or maybe even the top 1/10 of 1%? So I want to just get back to this chart, which I think is really interesting. And I want everybody to take a deep breath and think about this. At a time when the top 1/10 of 1% owns almost as much wealth as the bottom 90%, when the people on top, the very wealthiest Americans, are doing almost beyond imagination well, do you really want to cut food stamps and nutrition programs for hungry kids? Do you really want to make college education less affordable for working families? Do you really want to ask seniors to pay more for prescription drugs? People trying to live on $13,000, $14,000 a year. So here's the chart. This comes from Forbes magazine, not notably a left-wing publication. And they simply give us the facts. And here are the facts. The top 14 wealthiest people in this country have seen their net worth increase by $157 billion over the last 2 years. 14 people. Do my Republican colleagues go to these people and say, you know what, you're Americans, we got a lot of problems here, our middle class is disappearing, we have an infrastructure which is crumbling, we got millions of families can't afford to send your kids to college. You, the top 1/10 of 1%, are doing phenomenally well. Is it so hard for my Republican colleagues to say to these people, maybe you have to pay a little bit more in taxes? Let me just list them. Bill Gates, in that 2-year period, from 2013 to 2015, saw his wealth increase by $12 billion. Warren Buffett, $19 billion. Larry Ellison, $11 billion. Charles Koch, almost $9 billion. David Koch, almost $9 billion. Christy Walton, almost over $13 billion. Jim Walton, almost $14 billion. S. Robeson Walton, $13 billion. Michael Bloomberg, $8.5 billion. Jeff Bezos, $9.6 billion. Mark Zuckerberg, $20 billion. Sheldon Adelson, $4.9 billion. Larry Page, $6.7 billion. Sergey Brin, over $6 billion. That is just the increase in their net worth in a 2-year period. Who can deny that the very richest people in this country are doing phenomenally well? How do you ignore that reality? How do you not say to those people, you're going to have to help us with our infrastructure, with education, with our deficit? But my Republican colleagues have a different approach. Their approach is to say to working families, well, we're going to make it harder for your kids to get into Head Start. We're going to make it harder for you to get the nutrition programs you need to keep your family from going hungry. We're going to make it harder for seniors to get the prescription drugs they need. So I think this budget, the choices are pretty clear. It's laid right out there. Republicans want to balance the budget on the backs of the elderly, the children, the sick and the poor, and protect all of these guys, not ask them to pay 1 nickel more in taxes. I think that is wrong from a moral perspective, from an economic perspective, and I think this is a budget that should be defeated. And with that, Mr. President, I would yield the floor.